Good morning. Yak'n Pastor here with our third video in the series of Ruth and Boaz, a love story for the ages, and the 5 biblical principles of dating and marriage. We found so far that the main characters, are Ruth, who is a Moabite widow, and her mother-in-law, Naomi, who is also a widow. Naomi was a Jewish widow, and so she returns back from Moab to Israel with Ruth as her companion. But Ruth has also done something amazing. She has put her faith in the God of the Israelites, the God Almighty of creation, and she ends up needing to find a job. Both of them need to find a way to make a living, and so Ruth ends up gleaning, which is basically picking up the leftover harvest. Wheat and grain that's left on the ground or around the outside edge of the field. Um, she ends up gleaning in a field of a man named Boaz. Boaz happens to be a strong Jewish believer as well. They end up spending some time at lunch together, talking probably about their past, and so they start building a friendship. And then we get to this week, chapter 3, and we see that Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, is going to come up with a plan for she and Ruth to be taken care of, to be able to make a living and to be able to live well. And that plan involves Boaz. It's an interesting story. I hope that you're enjoying it to this point. It's one of my favorite stories in all the Bible. Pick up with me, if you will, in Ruth chapter 3. Uh, it says, on one day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." So here we see that Ruth and Naomi's relationship is not just one-sided. Naomi wants the best for Ruth as well. And so he said, "Now Boaz, with whose woman you have worked, is a relative of ours." Naomi points out to Ruth that the field that she ended up being in to start this gleaning process was in a field that was owned by a close male relative of her dead father-in-law. And it says this: "Tonight he will be winnowing barley in the threshing floor." See, the harvest was done. Essentially, it was the very end of the harvest. Boaz had allowed Ruth to glean in his fields, has provided protection for her during this harvest. And now at the end of the harvest, Naomi says, "Tonight you'll be winnowing barley in the threshing floor." Well, what was winnowing? Winnowing was it was a process that they needed to separate the wheat and the chaff. They needed to separate what was good from what was bad, basically, and they needed to separate the grain from the stalks. And so the process would start in an open-sided building, set usually on a hill. The wind would blow through that structure. In the meantime, what they would do is they would open up the stalks, and they would take a pair of donkeys or maybe an oxen, sometimes cattle or horses, and they would walk around and around and around on top of this grain in order to separate it. Obviously, the weightier part would stay down, and they would take winnowing forks, which basically were tines. We call them pitchforks these days. Um, and they would toss it up in the air, and the wind would catch the lighter material and blow it away while the heavier material would end up at the bottom. So what you ended up with was grain. Okay, and it says, "Wash and put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." So here's Naomi's plan for Ruth: take a bath, put on perfume, put on your best clothes, sneak up to where this guy has been eating or where he ends up sleeping after eating and drinking. And it still gets me after all this time of reading this story and looking at these principles that as a father, as a pastor, as a former youth minister and singles minister, this is the craziest plan that I've ever heard of in this regard. It seems like she's putting Ruth in a potentially dangerous sexual situation. If you keep listening here, it says, "Lay at Boaz's feet, and when he wakes up, when he wakes up. Tell him that you want him to be your kinsman redeemer. Okay, we'll get at that in just a second. But here's Ruth's response to Naomi. Ruth says, I will do whatever you say. Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and she did everything her mother in law told her to do. When Boaz finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went to lay down at the far end of the grain pile. I'm sorry. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. And can you picture this? I mean, we've seen enough spy movies and all that of people trying covertly to do things without being noticed, and that's what Ruth is doing. She's going over to where he's laid down. She's sneaking in there. She's lays down on his feet and probably puts the blanket or cover over a part of her. It says in the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" He asked. Logical question, isn't it? I mean, I would want to know if somebody was laying at my feet that wasn't there when I started, and obviously they're there. And specifically, it's a woman. So he wants to know who she is and what she's doing there. And it says this. Um, it's just a bizarre situation, I think. I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. See, Ruth is asking Boaz something very specific, and we'll have to wait until next week to figure out, or our next video, I'm sorry, to figure out exactly what this is. Today, I want to concentrate on the actions, not necessarily the conversation. And I said that Ruth is placing herself in a potentially compromising sexual position. Um, but nothing sexually compromising takes place. Here's the rest of this. It says Ruth asked her question, and Boaz responds, "The Lord bless you, my daughter." He replied, "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you're a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I'm a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night. In the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. If he's not willing, and surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So the conversation ends with an agreement for a course of action, which again, we're going to talk about in our next video, and they go to sleep. Um, but notice where Ruth is. She's at the feet of Boaz all night. So she lays at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "Now no one must know that the woman came to the threshing floor." Notice Boaz is very concerned about Ruth's reputation not being tarnished. He also said, "Bring me the shawl that you're wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother in law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" And then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother in law empty handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Again, we're going to discuss next video about specifically what the plan was, how the plan worked out, um, regarding the conversation and the commitments that were made. But let's talk about this third biblical principle today. The third biblical principle is practice sexual purity. Let me say that again: practice sexual purity. What does that mean? Ruth and Boaz spent the night together before they're married, but there's no physical intimacy, and so there's no guilt or shame. Now, I said before that as a dad, as a pastor, as a former youth minister and singles minister, that this whole situation is just kind of crazy. It screams danger. The idea of telling a young married woman to sneak alone to a secluded spot in the middle of the night, um, in order to meet up with an unmarried man, is something I never would do. And I'm sure none of you would either. But maybe a better way to think about this today would be a young man and a young woman parked in a secluded spot in the backseat of a car after midnight. That's not the time to determine, um, with emotions and desires running high, how far is too far, or should we be in this situation again? But again, back to Boaz and Ruth. Here's a young, presumably attractive young woman, laying at the feet of a man who's not her husband, and they're able to practice sexual restraint. Well, the question comes up: how were they able to do that? And I think it boils down to their love of God. What's the reason they were able to do that? And the respect of each other's character and that relationship they had with God, each one of them had with God. Bible says that you and I are supposed to resist fornication and sexual impurity. And I don't think it's because God is a cosmic killjoy. I don't think it's that he doesn't want us to enjoy life or have fun in it. But I think that he knows that sex before marriage or sex outside of marriage often leads to feelings of guilt and shame and worthlessness, even if the relationship doesn't end up long term. But even if the relationship progresses to marriage, guilt can often carry over into marriage and affect the relationship. I think it's a serious quicksand and needs to be um, respected as such, treated as such. In my counseling of married couples, uh, been told numerous times that sex before marriage puts a huge burden of guilt on at least one person in that relationship. And that feeling of guilt usually leads to feelings of resentment toward the other person in the relationship. Often, the one who feels guilty ends up feeling used because their feelings don't matter enough to wait until marriage. This can also lead to insecurity regarding whether the relationship would last without the sexual element to it. Some good scriptures confirming God's call to practice sexual restraint would be Hebrews 13, 4, 4, 1 Corinthians 10, 13, 1 Thessalonians 4, 3 through 5, Romans 12, 2, 1 Corinthians 7, 2, Galatians 5, 19, Romans 13, 14, Proverbs 6, 32, and Ephesians 5, 3, if you want to look at those at your convenience. Other potential long-term effects of premarital sex could be sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies, abortions, unwed mothers, trust and intimacy issues due to feelings of guilt. Um, but I think the key thing is here when we step out of line with what God's will is, there is guilt with our relationship with God. There is I don't want to say a buffer in a good way, but blockage. When we step outside of God's will, and we know we're stepping outside of God's will, He doesn't love us less. He doesn't desire a relationship with us less. We put that wall up. We put that. I know I've messed up. I don't want to be in your presence right now because I've messed up. But the good news is that God's always forgiving. God is always wanting to restore that relationship, whatever degree it's broken with Him. He wants to restore it to us, um, and so He's always available to that. But here's the other thing: our world constantly presents sexually related images. Steady diet of those images leads to desires to see more and even experience some of those things in marriage. So while this is talking about dating with Ruth and Boaz, it also pertains to our marriage relationships and keeping our marriage bed pure, practicing sexual purity with inside of our marriage. So pornography for going to men's clubs or women's clubs, all those different things. So those affect our relationship with our spouse or our significant other, but they also impact our relationship with God. So here's the other thing that I found. I've never had anybody come in my office and say, in the middle of a divorce or the middle of an affair, I've never had them say, I planned on this. 5 years ago, I came up with a game plan, and I'm exactly where I want to be right now. In fact, most of them, what they say is, I never planned to go this far. So what do we do with this? God specifically tells us in His Word that husbands and wives are to love only each other and show that love through their faithfulness with each other, because marriage is supposed to be a picture to the world of what a relationship with God looks like. That faithfulness that we have for each other, we show the world that faithfulness for God in that regard. So, can I share some good news for you? The good news is God is all about forgiveness and rebuilding purity into our relationships, whether we're married or not. Here's some good scriptures to read and understand regarding rebuilding sexual purity in your life. Second Chronicles 7:14, 1 John 1:9, Luke 15:1 through 32. What God asks of all of us is to realize our sin and turn back in humility to Him, and He promises to make us new again. It doesn't mean that we go back to being a virgin or not having an affair, but what it means is that we can choose to be pure from now on. We can choose to do things God's way from this point on. And so our third principle of practicing sexual purity relates to both dating and marriage, and it's a critical factor.
To view a more in-depth study of these books, click on the playlist, and also like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our website at yaknpastor.com. Yak'n Pastor out.